This is Blue Left, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the underrepresented Democratic voices in Tennessee, working tirelessly to bring progressive change to the volunteer state. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
That's right. From grassroots organizers to community leaders, from urban centers to rural towns, we'll highlight the diverse perspectives and powerful voices that often go unheard. Join us as we lift up the blue wave and shine a light on the path toward a more inclusive and equitable Tennessee. Again, I'm your host, Peggy Kingsbury, and this is Blue Lift, where every voice matters. Let's get started. Well, friends, here we are again. Welcome back to Blue Lift, and as always, I'm excited about my guest. I only invite people who really make me happy because it's my podcast. I get to do that. And I am here today with Claire Jones. We're going to tell you some things about Claire, and then I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about what she's really into right at this very moment in time in her life. Claire is a Kentucky native. She was educated at Belmont, has a degree in nursing. She's married to a singer-songwriter named Brett Jones. And they have 3 adorable children. And that's probably about the whole background I want to give you on Claire, because I want us to get into some really important things. Claire is running for office, and she is now going to tell you what office she's running for. And Claire, tell everyone why you decided to run for office.
Sure. So I'm running for House District 61. District 61 is almost all of Brentwood, Cool Springs area, North Franklin, historic downtown Franklin, and then kind of out like you're going to 96. So it's a pretty big district, but a lot of why I'm running is when I first became a nurse, I wanted to help people. And I started realizing through my nursing profession how much policy was directly affecting my ability to take care of my patients. So I started kind of paying attention to federal policy, local policy coming through. It made me realize how important education was. I had patients that couldn't read their discharge paperwork. So no matter how hard you I worked in a critical care unit, no matter how hard you worked to save their life, once they were going back out into that environment that put them in the hospital in the first place,
right,
if they can't manage their disease process, it's like pushing a rope.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I started to realize how important, basic things were: affordable housing, education, access to, we have parts of Tennessee that are still food deserts, but now we're seeing parts of Tennessee that are healthcare deserts.
Right.
So I started, wanting to pay a little bit more attention, getting involved, in that aspect. I thought about going back to school and getting a master's in public health. And I had a coworker, Caitlin Kaufman, who was shot and killed on the side of 440 in 2020. And that was right at, in the middle of a pandemic. Healthcare workers, we were exhausted, burnout, tired. And then that I had always been concerned about gun violence in the stance that I had children in school. And, after Sandy Hook, I realized that they weren't going to do anything to protect our kids in school. It was kind of up to us. So after that happened with Caitlin, there was some legislation that went through that was kind of in response to her murder, but it wasn't at the root of the cause.
Correct. And just, so people who are listening, if they don't know about what happened to Caitlin, it was just a random shooting, right? I mean,
she was on her way to work.
Right. And someone just decided to fire a gun out the window of their car, right?
I think it was like some road rage. But at St. Thomas, which is where we both worked, we had a saying that no patient should die alone. And so if you had a patient that you knew was going to pass, your time was spent taking care of them, and the other nurses knew they might have to take care of your other patient. I mean, we worked together, and it was just heartbreaking that she did die alone on the side of the road in her scrubs.
Wow.
So that really upset me that we weren't doing something more to address this. And then obviously Covenant happened.
Right.
And as I was driving to one of the protests at the Capitol, coming from Franklin, I drive by the Covenant School, and, there was still media and stuff there. And, it's hard to drive by that spot and not get a little bit emotional.
Sure.
But then getting on 440, going to the Capitol, I passed Caitlin's memorial. And I just thought, like, enough is enough.
That's right.
But then what we saw after the Tennessee 3 and more things were coming out over the summer after special session when, nothing happened. And then before going into the next session, they started talking about rejecting federal funding for our schools. Vouchers started to be, and I just thought, this is too much. And I didn't really think about it that much. It was just like, somebody has to do something. These people cannot run uncontested, and we have to do something. And so it just seemed pretty obvious that trying to shame them, trying to go to them and share your stories, that's not working. We have to replace them. I heard somebody say the other day, unfortunately, advocacy isn't working. And so now we just have to change who the lawmakers are.
That's exactly right. Yep. And I love so many parts of that story, but what really strikes me, and I've heard you tell much of that before, but it's just so interesting because all of the things that you talked about, gun violence, healthcare law, education issues, all those things affect all of us.
All of us.
And it sort of amazes me, though, that many voters are not really sparked to actually get out and vote and help a candidate, whether it's monetarily or knocking on doors or making phone calls, until one of those issues really hits them in the face. And I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking there's just a bit of selfishness involved in that because, I haven't had any big healthcare issues. I don't have children in school. I've been a victim of gun violence, but it was many, 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 many years ago. But I hope that I always have enough empathy in me to care about those things because it really does affect other people. And your story is so interesting because you've shown us how all of those things can affect most of us at one time or another. And for people who are interested in the money of it all, the healthcare issue affects our pocketbooks, everybody's really, because when you have these healthcare deserts that you talked about, these small towns where you don't have doctors and don't have a rural hospital because, they've closed a lot of them in Tennessee. When you just have a lot of really ill people around, somebody will eventually have to pay for the very serious health condition that comes about,
Yes, there are consequences of legislation. I will say that our legislators are not healthcare professionals, so I understand that they don't initially, when they present legislation, they might not understand the ramifications of that.
Correct.
But if you look at our abortion ban, and especially when I talk to people knocking on doors, what I'm trying to help them understand is that there are ripple effects from that have consequences for people who are pregnant.
Yes.
And want to have access to care. So I think we've seen OBGYNs coming for residency drop by about 20%.
Yes.
We have physicians leaving the state. We have some choosing to not practice in that field because it is so heavily litigated.
Right.
We're asking our physicians to make legal decisions instead of healthcare decisions. So they're not even able to actually do their job. But one of the first things that gets cut, so when we talk about rural hospital closures, if a hospital is trying to stay open, one of the first things they cut is labor and delivery.
Absolutely. Yep.
So if you're in a state where, for instance, you haven't expanded Medicaid, and you have so
like
many,
this one.
Yes, and you have so many uninsured. So you see these hospitals closing or trying to cut corners. And I don't mean cut corners, but trying to stay open. And so they're cutting labor and delivery. And you have women that don't have access to OBGYNs because they're leaving the state. Now a healthy pregnancy could go awry because we know that preventative care is the least costly and it is also the best care. So when I was in nursing school, and I don't love anecdotal stories, but this one really does. When I was in nursing school, I was doing one of my rotations at a rural hospital here in Middle Tennessee, and a woman came in And I don't know the whole backstory. We just ended up in the OR. They had an emergency C-section. Her baby, I think she was 34 weeks pregnant, and her baby was already 10 pounds.
Ooh.
Because she had gestational diabetes
Right.
that was
Didn't know it.
undiagnosed and was not, we can treat that.
Absolutely, you can.
Her baby was born deceased.
Wow.
And was transferred to, a different medical facility, and here she was.
She just didn't have the care that she needed.
Yeah. And again, I don't know all the backstory and stuff, but there are ramifications to legislation that go beyond maybe the scope of what the intention was.
Correct.
And when the frustrating thing, and to go back to what you were saying earlier about how voters are moved by single issues or this or that a big part of my campaign is restoring balance and actually bringing back representation. So it doesn't really matter what the issue at the time is, whether it's gun violence or whether we're fighting for our public schools. Your representative should be someone coming from a balanced viewpoint.
Correct.
To make decisions in communication with their constituency.
And they should also understand that once they're elected, they represent everyone in their district.
Yes. That's, in running for office, I've talked to physicians who have said, I've sat down with our representative and I've explained him the ramifications of this or the ramifications of that. And they just simply say, well, we already understand this, go away.
Yeah. I live in your district, just for the listeners to, so full disclosure, I live in your district. And so I'm now, I was going to say represented by Gino Bulso, but I'm not represented by Gino Bulso because he's pretty well actually told me face to face that he doesn't represent me. But let's talk a minute about once you started going to the legislature and paying attention. I know you had some experience in committees. And so for the listeners who don't really understand how all this works, I'm certainly not qualified to completely explain it, but, a bill doesn't become a law until it becomes a bill, and it doesn't become a bill until it makes it out of committee. So a small group of legislators who are discussing, let's say, a finance bill. So they're on the finance committee, and they're going to discuss that. And in Tennessee, since we have a supermajority, what that means is there are so few Democrats that they don't, they don't allow us much representation anywhere, but certainly in committee. So you may have a committee of 7, and you might have 1 Democrat, maybe 2. So if a bill comes up that the Republicans don't like, they just kill it right there in committee. Mm-hmm. Now, committees are supposed to bring people in to talk with them about issues. So a committee room would have a place where they can have the public come in, and someone who knows about an issue, who's an authority about an issue, can discuss that. Sometimes it's more than an advocate. Sometimes it's a scientist or a physician or, But that's not really how our committees work that much in Tennessee. So tell me what you thought was going to happen in committee, and then what happened.
Mm-hmm. I can think of 2 examples. This last session, it didn't make its way out of committee, but there was a bill that would extend permitless carry to long guns, meaning that you could walk around with a loaded AR.
Right.
And that's, you can. Law enforcement actually came and testified against that. And I watched, I think it was in subcommittee at the time that I was there, I watched them still pass the bill through the subcommittee, even after they heard law enforcement explain the dangers of this and how it would be confusing for law enforcement to make sure that communities are safe. Jeez. And so they're not listening even to the experts, which I'm sure all of them have, Blue Lives Matter.
Right. Sure they do. But do they really?
Yeah. No, yeah. They're a walking contradiction.
Yes.
But another committee hearing I was in, I don't remember the bill. It was something somewhat, it wasn't a one we were tracking, but somebody brought up there's legal in every committee hearing. That can kind of, if somebody refers to legal, they can look up how that law would look constitutionality wise.
Right.
And I can't remember what the bill was, but the attorney came back and said, this does seem likely unconstitutional. It could open the state up for, litigation. And they passed it anyways.
Oh, I mean, I wish I should have researched this beforehand. I wish I knew how many lawsuits we're in right now over bills they passed that are unconstitutional. It's a list. I mean, it's not just one or two. It's a list because of things like this. And they say, we just don't care. And I guess it's because they think one of two things will happen. Either, well, fine, we'll litigate it and we may lose, but at least I'll get to say to my constituents, look what I tried. Look what I passed. And it sounds great. Or they can think, well, we know what judge that's going to. They're on our side. It'll be okay. But actually in Tennessee, it's almost never okay. They say, no, you can't do that. And then the legislature's like, oh, okay, well, sorry, never mind.
And this is the danger of a supermajority.
Yes.
It is antithetical to our democratic values. And I would think that this is not just like a Republican versus Democrat issue. This is, the future of our state.
Correct.
And we should all be united. And I've told people, you run under party affiliation, but we're all people. And we really should talk about our platforms more. And then, I said something when I first started running, and it's really kind of resonated with people, that democracy thrives in purple.
Yes, it does.
Because that's where, if you have that balance, you're pushing out extreme voices.
And you can have discussions and not arguments.
Yes. And I've talked to Republican leaders in Williamson County where we've even said, as long as our goals are the same, how we get there is where democracy is.
Correct.
So we can have our disagreements, we can even have our fights, but our goal is the same.
Should be. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I started realizing, at least with Representative Bolso, that my hopes, goals, want for the future here in Williamson County is not the same as his.
Right. Because I think that what he wants is his version of what a perfect life should be, I guess.
His interpretation of, I kind of look at it like his interpretation of Second Amendment, for instance, because he shuts down any conversation about gun legislation where we have a Second Amendment right.
Right.
And he uses political rhetoric to essentially stop the conversation. But also, when someone comes to you and they say, the goal is to preserve life, it is to protect children. It's the number one cause of death for kids in Tennessee. In fact, just living in Tennessee, my kids have a 36% increased risk of of being shot by a firearm just because they live in a state that has such lax gun laws. So can we stop talking about this part, and can we talk about this part? Like, the goal should be, what can we do to keep kids safe? I'll reach across the aisle to anybody who wants to work and say, even if somebody, there's lots of space where we might on other things disagree, but we can certainly disagree on something like safe storage laws.
Well, you would hope. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
and I think
would.
most people, Governor Lee's own poll showed that 80% of Tennesseans wanted to see common sense gun legislation. So it's just frustrating to me that we can't even have that conversation with our representatives, that they just shut it down. And it's just so unfair. But I also think, at least in my race and in our district, the biggest thing is our representative is not coming and talking to the district about the things that are important. And that's where that's where the representation ends. And that should never stand. If you're going to sign on to gun legislation that allows teachers to carry firearms, don't you think you should talk to the head of Williamson County School Security about that?
Well, of course you should. And you should talk to teachers, and you should talk to parents.
You should talk to the school board. You should talk to the superintendent.
Yes.
You should talk to the people that this is going to affect.
But none of them did that. None of them did that because they knew what the answer, was going to be.
And you saw all these school boards come out rejecting.
Yeah. Again, another law they passed that really, won't go many places because no one's going to support that. I mean, very few. There are a few counties who will, but I haven't really heard yet of any teacher anywhere in Tennessee.
I don't think there's any county that has said they're going to do it.
Right.
There's just some that haven't rejected it.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're actively doing it. And,
correct.
And again, I do think local control is really important. What works in Nashville or Memphis might not work in a, it's the same argument with vouchers. There's communities that don't have private schools.
Correct. And that's one of the biggest problems.
Yeah. So, I mean, everything comes, you are a representative. You go to your community, you talk to your community, find out what they need, what helps strengthen it, what helps support it, and then you take that with you to Nashville. And that's just not happening for us. I don't think it's happening for a lot of communities.
Right. And yes. And so, I mean, that's one of the things that we stress here at Blue Lift is that every voice matters. But it is true that there are so many times when I feel like the only voice that matters is the person who got elected in his voice. It's just in this case. So let's talk a little bit about, I thought the committee discussion was important. And before we move ahead, I do want to say this. For people who want to be invested in the process and for people who really have an issue that's super, super important to them, by the time it makes it to the legislature for an overall vote, it is too late to get involved. It's done deal by then. Because how many times last year did they bring a bill to the floor that failed? Almost never. And that's what happens when you have a supermajority. They're not going to bring a bill that's going to fail. And they're going to allow very limited discussion. So it's too late to get involved. So if you have an issue that you're super involved with, the committee time is when you should really know what's going on. So also meeting with the legislators. Now, tell me a little bit about some of your experiences you've had meeting with the various legislators about, gun laws or reproductive rights or whatever the issue was you were talking about.
So what's interesting talking about a bill being in committee is sometimes before that legislation has even made its way to a committee room, it's in the halls of Cordell Hull. You have people already talking about that bill and going to advocate either for or against it.
Lobbyists.
Yes.
In and out.
So I was going to say, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Even by the time that bill reaches a committee, I think there's a lot of people that have already kind of made up their minds in some ways. But I have gone with nurses to advocate. There was a bill this last session. It didn't make its way out of anything, but it was to allow nurse practitioners who practice in the mental health field to have a little bit more autonomy because we have such a need for mental health in our state.
Yes, we do.
And just access to that.
And you would think they would be for that because they want to say it's not the guns, it's mental health. Well, then do something for mental health.
Right. But again, you have all kinds of, other people coming out, that's a whole other thing in talking about, extending more autonomy to our nurse practitioners to help them fill that gap, which is, we have a physician shortage as well as a nurse shortage, and how do we best utilize our nurse practitioners? And so it does feel like when you follow the suggestions that they give you, like we need access to mental health. Okay, how about this? It didn't even make it. I don't even think that it went to committee to get voted on. And I'm sure there's lots of other reasons for that, but it feels as though things get stalled, and when you have a supermajority, it feels intentional because the structure of our government, it allows for, just like in healthcare, there's things that happen that are frustrating and it's just kind of part of it, and we have to work in the means of that. But when you have a supermajority, they take over and almost overly expose those kinds of like loopholes.
Correct.
So no one in the public, no one reading an article in the Tennessean knows that there was a bill that would have extended the access to mental health that just didn't make it through.
That's correct.
They don't know that.
Right.
So it's easy to continue to spew, well, we need this, we need that, but you're not doing that, and you're actively kind of working against it. But I think, again, it goes back to, if we have a balance, that doesn't happen, right? If you have a balance, the extremist voices that are just want to gaslight us and tell us it's this issue, it's not this, they don't have the platform to continue to say that, because they're being countered. And being bipartisan, I think, is one of the most American things we can do.
Oh, totally. And of course, I will say there have been years where Tennessee has had a supermajority on the Democratic side, and in the distant past. I think I was going to say you were a child at that time, but and so it's not good either way. Right. It's not good either way. Let's talk a little bit about something that I just have always thought. I cannot understand why Tennessee does not expand Medicare or Medicaid. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is when they hear that, because I've asked some people, I said, what does that mean to you? And they're like, oh, well, it just means you're going to give more benefits to people who don't work. That's not it at all. What it means is that, right now, the people in Tennessee who qualify for Medicaid, which is government-provided health care, have to be so poor that they basically have $500 a month to live on.
And you want to know a sad statistic? 50% of the state's children are covered under 10 care.
Yes.
So, that means that over half our state's kids are living in poverty.
That's right. And so expanded Medicaid means that they move the amount of money a family can have up a little bit, and they still qualify for Medicaid. And what that means is it just takes in more uninsured people, who cannot afford a policy through the healthcare portal, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it. They certainly can't afford to buy it in the open market. Their job probably doesn't provide it, although the reality is, if you have a father working a minimum wage job, which in Tennessee can be very, very little, because again, Tennessee minimum wage is, I don't know what, $3.75 or something. I don't know. Maybe it's $7.25.
We haven't raised
it ever, and we probably never will. So if you have, if you have a dad working and there's a mom and two little babies at home, she can't afford to go to work. She can't afford daycare. She doesn't have family to help her, et cetera, et cetera. But his job may give him health care at a very, very reasonable amount of money. But to bring his wife and kids on, it takes up his whole salary. And, so it's either health care or food, So the Medicaid expansion would help a family like that. And the interesting thing in Tennessee is, and I don't know if you know this or not, you probably do, but that whole refusal to expand Medicaid, the blockade on it is what they called it. And I think there's a bill that they even passed. Kelsey and Durham were the two that were working on that. Well, one of them's headed to jail, and the other one, neither one of them are in the legislature anymore. They were both kicked out.
Was one of them the one with the sexual abuse allegations?
Yes. And so it was those two clowns.
Trying to figure out just exactly what we did.
Those two clowns that brought that bill. And now it's really affecting a lot of people in such a negative way. And we're leaving federal money on the table.
And there's actually a lawsuit right now. I wish I need to learn all the details about it. But just last week, it is in the courts. A federal judge looked at it and said that essentially tens of thousands of people lost their 10 care coverage. It wasn't constitutional. It had to do with parents didn't fill out the paperwork or something.
I read about that.
Correctly, and so they just dropped them.
Yes.
Which, we'll see how that plays out in the courts, but how cruel.
Oh, yeah. And the amount of money that Tennessee spends on attorneys to try to fix the stuff that they've done, it's ridiculous.
Right.
Well, I want to kind of change gears here fairly drastically.
Can I say one thing, too, about Medicaid expansion? Not only is it the right thing to do, we're leaving money on the table. Essentially, it's like double taxation. We've already paid taxes.
Correct.
To the federal government. They should come back to our state and help our state. But when you have so many uninsured in Tennessee, it drives everyone else's healthcare costs up. So things that cost, if somebody can't afford their health care and they go to the emergency room, they're still going to receive that care. But that cost is going to be spread to the rest of us.
Correct.
So even people who don't understand or maybe who don't care because they don't use that as, their form of health coverage, wouldn't you want all of our healthcare costs to come down? I mean,
well, sure.
Yeah. So that's what I've been telling people is expanding Medicaid helps all of us.
Well, and I'm always frequently have been very confused about why they don't want to expand Medicaid. And I know it's got something to do with they don't want the federal government in our business as a state. They don't want any of the federal government rules about health care to, be mixed in with what we're doing. And they do get a portion of money from the government to put into TennCare, which the state claims they can use and spend better than the federal government could. But, of course, we know that's not true. Because you have all these people who are in that bubble who can't, they can't afford health insurance, but they're not poor enough to get Medicaid. And so we've just left them out. We've just completely left them out of the system. So I want to talk a little bit about your experience as a nurse. And I know now you are working as a hospice nurse. And a lot of people don't understand that hospice doesn't necessarily mean that you're on your deathbed.
The technical, you have a diagnosis where your life expectancy is 6 months or less. But I have, some people, their disease is going to progress rapidly, but they're in a situation where we're managing their symptoms. But I have many patients that I've had even, 6 months to a year. I've taken care of them for a long time. Their loss felt like I lost someone.
Right.
So
right.
It's not just you're rolling in and you've got a week to live. I mean, sometimes that does happen, but you're really building relationships with family. The thing I love about hospice care is that it is when we admit a patient, we sit down, usually, family's there, and we just talk about what's important to that person. So some patients will say, I have pain, but I want to still be able to experience things. And so even though I have pain, I don't want to be knocked out.
Right.
And
I want to be able to say goodbye to people or whatnot.
If I have a few aches and pains, but it means I can still go and get in the car and drive with the kids to Dairy Queen. I had a patient that just really enjoyed on Sundays, that's what they would do. And they wanted to be able to continue to do that. Not them driving, but being part of that. And so the care is catered to that individual. And you can't come in and just assume that okay, you have this type of cancer. We know that, the pain is going to be XYZ. There's no one size fits all.
Correct.
And so it is really the patient, it's really patient and family driven. And I was surprised at how much I liked being a hospice nurse, coming from critical care and begrudgingly being floated to the ER at times. I just thought, I was burnt out with COVID, and I had a third child, and I was on night shift, and 12-hour shifts turned into 13 and 14-hour shifts, and I was underpaid, and so that's why I shifted. But I've really enjoyed taking care of people in their home.
Interesting. So the question I want to ask is, I know that your campaign slogan is people over politics.
People over party, yeah.
People over party, yeah.
Same thing,
People over party, yeah. So, and I know I read a book about written by a hospice nurse, and she talked about
Which one was it? I might have read it.
The things that dying people regret, the regrets of the dying people. Mm. But it was really about, when you are reaching the end of life, what really are the things that matter to people? And I would assume in your role, because I know you're a very caring person. Everything you've ever done in your life has been about caring for people. Mm-hmm. Really, it has. Raising kids, running for office, working as a nurse. And so tell me a little bit about what kind of things you see, what common themes you see that might be the regrets of the dying.
I do get asked this a lot. It's interesting. It's not, from my experience at least, I don't feel like people have regrets in the sense that, oh, I regret I didn't say XYZ to someone or this or that. It's a more thoughtful approach of focusing on the things that really matter in that moment. And I would say, because I don't feel like it's regrets.
Well, in this book, I'll just give you an example. In this book, one of the things she says is that dying people will typically regret not spending more time with their friends.
Yes. So, maybe I'm stuck on the word regret. Most of my patients who didn't have a dementia and were able to, really communicate with me, it was more their advice than them expressing their regrets.
Okay.
It was more...
What kind of advice are they giving you?
Oh, spending time with your family, learning to let things go.
Yes.
And not, especially when you're, it's like that song, Live Like You Were Dying.
Correct.
Just recognizing, like, why did I spend so much time worrying about... I had one patient tell me, because I was sitting around, doing my charting, and she was in the bed, and we were just talking, and she had raised about 4 kids, and so we were talking about being parents, and I was telling her, I was like, I get home, and I've got all these dishes to do, and then I got to clean up this and this and that, and she was like, can't it just, like, sit there? And she was like, who cares if your house is dirty while your kids are little?
That's right. That's true.
Does that really matter? And she wasn't trying to be, esoteric or anything like that. She was just like, oh, just let that go. What does that matter?
Right.
You know, she said, I never thought about how clean my house was. I just wanted my kids to feel loved and, wanted to spend time with them. So more things like that of learning to focus on the things that really matter. I've had some patients that are dying because of a disease process that they brought on due to addiction, particularly alcohol. Mm-hmm. And those are probably the ones where people do express regret.
Right.
But the regret doesn't have to do with, I drank myself into this situation and now I'm scared to die. It's more, what have I done to my relationships and to, it's not rooted in
about themselves.
Yeah. It's not rooted in themselves. It's rooted in, thinking about how it's hurt other people, or especially if someone is having to take care of them. There's a lot of people who they struggle with having someone having to take care of them, someone having to stop what they're doing. And I've watched couples realize how much they love each other in one is having to take care of the other one.
Right.
And I think that makes them sad that they didn't realize that part of their relationship.
Oh, interesting.
Or that part of,
that
how
it took something horrible like that to bring them back together and realize what they mean to one another.
But I will say, I had a patient, she had a traumatic fall, and that precipitated her, essentially being put on hospice and being given a time frame. And so we were managing her pain, but she was with it. And I developed a really good relationship with her and her daughter. And when she passed, in her obituary or memorial, it said, in lieu of flowers, please give a donation to Everytown to end gun violence.
How about that?
And it was, after the Covenant shooting. But there are things that I have learned from my patients that even though I don't know how to quantify it or put it into when you hold someone's hand when they're at the end of their life, even if there's no word said between you, you learn something. And I think that has a lot to do with why I decided to just run for office and not overthink it. Was if you do regret something, you usually regret what you didn't do.
Correct.
I don't hear a lot of people saying, oh, I did XYZ. I wish I hadn't done that. It's more of, I should have. And in the book, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but one of the things is many people just regret that they didn't travel more. And, I think, and then it goes on to explain that, and some of the reason that people don't travel a lot is because they think they've got to do it in high style. And, you can, you don't have to. A lot of people too just say that they feel like they didn't live their true, authentic.
Oh, totally. And people regret having worked too much. That was one of the ones that came up a lot. But
that's why I became a nurse. Was I was like, if I work too much, at least I love my job.
And there you go. yeah, that works for a while.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that it's the relationships that people, when they're at their end of their life, they're thinking about relationships. And that's why I think, your focus on the people and the things that we have in common. And, when it comes right down to it, we all sort of want many of the same things. We want to feel secure. We want to feel, joy in life. And we want the people who we care for to also be secure and happy.
It's interesting because I'm having my own epiphany, but being a hospice nurse has made me happier because instead of, I think people say that you think about death or this or that. I think the more that you're surrounded by it, the more that you learn to live.
Isn't that interesting? That is so true.
Yeah. I'm more focused on, I know I'm going to die one day. And I know I'll go through all the stages of grief. Denial is going to be a real fun one for me. But it's kind of helped me accept my own mortality to where I just live. And I don't really think as much about the consequences of it or this or that. It's just if I feel pulled in that direction, just let that happen. Because again, I've never had a patient say, well, I shouldn't have done this or I shouldn't have done that. It's always, I wish I had done this so have you ever read Lonesome Dove?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So, but the premise. Did you watch the 90s miniseries?
Yeah.
Okay. Big Robert Duvall fan over here. But, it's in the book, but it's also a great scene in the movie. So Woodrow and Gus are the two main characters, and Woodrow's always the straight-laced, you got to do it this way by the book and keeps things to himself. And Gus is kind of like a Western free spirit.
Yeah.
And they're arguing. They're on a cattle drive and they're arguing. And at one point, Woodrow's talking about, well, when I die, I want, he's thinking about his, how he'll feel, I guess, posthumously of when I die, I want to have done this or that, and Gus just gets so frustrated. He goes, my God, Woodrow, it's not dying I'm talking about, it's living.
That's right. And
I feel like that sums up being a hospice nurse.
Yeah, no,
in
you're
a
right.
weird way.
No,
we don't talk about dying with the patients.
We
really don't.
That's interesting. And I've been around a couple of people who were in a situation where they were dying. And those are not the things we talked about.
Yeah.
And I've had them say some of the things that I remember from this book is, spend more time with your friends and spend more time with your family. Don't work so hard.
It's not dying, it's living.
Yeah. Don't work so hard. And if you want to take the trip or see the thing or have the thing or do the thing, do it, And don't worry so much about what other people think. And that's one of the biggest ones, is not worrying so much about what other people think. And I know some listeners may be thinking, what in the world does this have to do with politics? But it really does, because to me, what it says is as humans, we want so many of the same things. And there have to be areas in politics where we can pull together. And I think what frustrates me most about the firearm issue is that there are just some things that I believe should be so basic.
Their quality of life.
They're quality of life issues.
Yeah.
And, I'm a former police officer. I own a gun, but for example, a waiting period. I cannot think of any reason on earth why someone has got to have one right this minute, and that reason be a good reason.
Yeah, I think the two main ones are they're either suicidal or homicidal.
Exactly. It's not like you've said, I'm thinking about going hunting. I'll stop on my way and pick up a gun. That you got to get a license and all that. I mean, no, that's not it. And it's not like, I think I'll take up target shooting. Let me just go run by a gun today, and I've got to have it right now.
Well, and I think and I made a post about this on my social after the shooting in Georgia, because my husband and I own firearms as well. We have allowed leadership and gun lobbyists and gun manufacturers to spin the narrative to where normal people, I would say the majority of people, if they understood that something would limit death, we come together as a community. And I think I'd said, as a gun owner, I accept reasonable laws that will keep children I'll never even meet safe.
That's right.
So that they can live to adulthood. Why would we as a community not go, oh, I understand now why we have that. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And I even talked to someone at their doorstep. They told me they were going to vote for Donald Trump and probably wouldn't vote for me because I was a Democrat. And we had a really honest conversation, and he explained that guns were a big issue of what he was voting on. But by the end of the conversation, he said, I could understand a 24-hour waiting period.
Exactly.
And he was like, that's, yeah.
And when people say, but the Second Amendment, and I said, well, okay, we've got the First Amendment, but you cannot say just anything.
No.
You cannot write just anything.
And we know why, right? Because words are hurtful.
That's
words
right.
can incite things.
And we have laws against those, and they've been all through the Supreme Court. So just because it's amendment doesn't mean it. An amendment just doesn't mean it can't have some bumpers on it, And, of course, the famous one is, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. However, in Tennessee, you can walk into a crowded theater with a gun. So.
I mean, I teach my children that you don't say something that's unkind.
That's right.
You check yourself, because we're here in community. And I mean, it's, words, the foundation of why we, first of all, it always drives me crazy because I'm like, the Second Amendment is an amendment. Like, just the fact that it's an amendment says that our Constitution is a living, breathing document, and that we can be flexible and navigate through that.
Correct.
And, my representative, your representative, has said we should go back to 1700s values.
He does
before there were any amendments, including, the one that ratified my right to vote.
He does say that. And I think, he would not entertain being pressed about that. So I'm not real sure
he means
what he meant by that. But he means religion, basically.
Yeah, I think he means, the foundations of what we are founded on were great, right? There's nobody that questions that. But, and I think I said this in my statement the other day too, our founders, as imperfect as they were, would never want us to live in a society where kids are being slaughtered and we're not doing anything about it.
Yes, we were found on a good foundation, unless you were a woman, unless you were a person of color. I mean, they had to work their way through slavery and finally get rid of that. And, and it took a long time for a woman to have a right to vote, to have a credit card, to buy a house, to do all the things.
I think it was like the late 70s before you could get a credit card without.
Yeah. And actually, I graduated from the University of Georgia in 1981 and took a job as a police officer. And I couldn't rent my apartment without my daddy's signature because I was new to the community and had a new job, even though the city was saying, oh, yeah, we're going to pay her, They weren't paying me much. They weren't paying me enough to rent my little apartment. Well, this has been fun. So I'm gonna ask you one last question, and then we're gonna wrap it up. After you're elected, you will get a chance to put 25 bills forward as a representative in Tennessee.
Is it 15? I think it's 15 now.
Okay.
Oh, you mean in the whole?
Yeah, I think it's 15 for the Senate, maybe 25 for the House of Representatives. Anyway, you get a chance to put a big number of bills up. What's the first one going to be?
I've been asked this.
Oh, shoot. I thought I was asking a question nobody else had ever asked.
No, but it's a really good one.
Yeah, it is.
Because it's a loaded question. Because what can be passed in the current legislature.
Right.
Like how many seats will be flipped? Will we have it's going to be a while before we just have a simple majority.
Will you have any chance at getting something passed?
Yes. So what I would love to do is to finally expand Medicaid because of all the just how much that would help with the crisis that we're in immediately with our rural hospitals closing. And I know that that's not the one size fits all. That's not going to fix all the problems.
No, but it's important.
But it's a start, and it's so easy. We're just leaving money at the table. It's just so easy. It doesn't increase taxes for anybody. It doesn't, it is literally just so easy. So I don't understand why we can't do that. But I also would really love to see a safe storage bill. And I think Jeff Yarborough, Senator Yarborough, and Representative Hemmer have brought forth a safe storage bill because what we're seeing in Tennessee is so many guns are being stolen from cars right now, and then they're being used in violent crimes. So, and plus you have accidental shootings. If we had safe storage, like what happened in Georgia, wouldn't be able to happen here. You know, if we were locking our guns up, so of course, I guess he gave that gun to his son.
Right. But yes, you're right. And yeah.
But so what is frustrating is I got some things that I would love, but I don't know that they would pass in the current legislature.
Well, we have to crawl before we can walk.
Yeah.
And
so I think expanding Medicaid, it's high time we do that. Mississippi, I don't know if they've finally done it, but they're doing
it. Yeah.
They were doing it.
And I think the public needs to be educated about that too. There needs to be a lot of education because, as I said, when I talk to people about it, they just don't understand at all what that means. You know, because a lot of people's impression, quite frankly, Claire, is that, well, if the Tennessee legislature says it and does it, it must be the right thing for us.
Right. And one thing, too, I want voters to know, too, before is right now, we're playing defense.
Yes.
So to flip a seat for somebody who is for vouchers is also an important thing.
Correct.
To be a vote no for things like that are important. So what we're doing is we're not just trying to pass legislation. We're trying to prevent legislation that would hurt our communities.
Correct. Great. Well, wow, this was fun.
Yes, thank you so much.
How many days till the election?
I stopped counting.
I think it's like 60-something, right?
No, we're in the
50s.
I don't even think of it for that because early voting starts October 16th.
Which is
I don't do math, but
barely a month away.
Yeah, it's coming up. So that's mentally, I'm in election day starts October 16th. Because early voting is where we see, at least in my district, that's where we see a lot of people come out and vote. So,
sure. Yeah.
So that's kind of my focus. But yeah, the countdown begins. I'm having fun.
Well, and it is interesting. I'm having fun supporting you too, because I do think that, and I will tell you that when I've knocked on doors, I've talked to many people who may be voting red at the top of the ticket and blue in other places on the ticket, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. Kind of fine, but I mean, I'm glad they're voting for you. Anyway, so I think, I'm feeling that people maybe we are coming down the backside of all the hatefulness and the ugly rhetoric, at least around here. I feel that we're starting to come over that hump, and I love that feeling.
Yes, I have not had one bad interaction. I had one person yell at us, but even when he yelled at us, he said, "I'm not mad at you." And then he told me that he was a very intelligent man.
Okay, well, when the man tells you that, we know what that means, don't we, women? I'm really smart, he says. I'm the smartest ever. There's never been anyone smarter.
I should have said, I'm picking up on very stable genius vibes.
Yes, there you go. Well, this has been fun. If people want to get involved in your campaign or find your stands on issues and whatnot, where do they go to do that?
So you can go to Claire Jones, 4tn.com, and I have an issue section that sometimes we kind of update and change, as we're talking to people. And then there's a volunteer section. And so we have phone banks, we have door knocking, which Peggy has come out and knocked doors for us. It's actually really fun.
It is fun.
We do a training. You don't ever go alone. So if you've never knocked doors, but we have phone banks, door knocking. There's a donate button on the website as well, which is super important. All those big signs that are getting ready to go up in the district are expensive, and your donation helps us get our word out, send mail pieces, digital ads. So every dollar matters. You can also go to my social media. I have Instagram and Facebook. I think it's Vote Claire J 4TN, and we also have updates on volunteer opportunities on that as well.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of this busy campaign season to be here. I know with the rain coming up, that might put a little bit of a damper on some of the door knocking this weekend.
We just talked about getting our umbrellas out.
Lightning, unless there's lightning and thunder out.
We'll go take a break at the Dairy Queen.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's right. We love that Dairy Queen. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening to Blue Lift, where every voice does matter, and I truly mean that. You know, we have some voices come in here that are somewhat opposite of yours, and that's okay. Every voice does matter, but we do want to raise the issues that affect people, those kitchen table issues that you hear people talk about a lot. We want to work on those issues, and we want everyone to get up in the morning having a really good chance at having a great life. You know?
Absolutely. Maybe we need to put a kitchen table in the well.
Yeah, maybe we do.
Maybe that, because I feel like I've hashed out more. I mean, I tell people, my husband, his political beliefs are similar to mine, but like in any marriage, you know, you figure it out. So maybe we just need
to get around that table and we need a kitchen table and a coffee pot and just let's sit down and discuss it, fellas.
Yeah. Some people get decaffeinated coffee.
Yeah, some people, you have to earn coffee. Coffee's for closers. All right. So, hey, everyone, thanks for listening to Blue Lift. And if you feel led to, please go ahead and like the page on Blue Lift wherever you're listening to us from, and share that you love us and give us a couple of comments. And we'll talk to you next time.